Lastly, sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades.
Trump is hilarious. Yeah, that's a big one, right? Yeah, well, yeah. Depends what it says. Let's get a word from Professor David Dunn, Professor of International Politics, University of Birmingham. David, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I think we could just talk about the Trump response there for a moment. I mean, that was just that's a big one, that. I mean, of course, it is a big one. That assumes we're going to be told, or this release will shine some light, finally. I've got a sneaky feeling, and I have no qualification for saying this, David, but I don't think we're going to get an answer here.
Yeah, and what this is a window on the performative nature of Trump's politics. He likes the theatre. He likes to actually give the impression of doing a huge amount of stuff, and some of it happens and some of it doesn't happen. With Trump, it's more wrestling than it is boxing. Some of these punches are pulled, really, and the promise here is going to be very different to the substance. What there is left to release is a tiny fragment of things which have been withheld for national security reasons, rather than because they contain anything of particular value or any particular bombshell. We're going to learn nothing of consequence as a consequence of this, but he's going to be seen to have done something and fulfill a promise that he made on the campaign. Yeah. And that's what this is about.
Yeah, so it's not the release of all the Kennedy files, it's the final release of the bit we're allowed to release, as it were.
Yeah, and there's nothing there to release, really. I mean, in a sense that there are no documents, that there is no evidence, that the generation who were involved in these have largely died out, that there is still questions remaining because people aren't convinced of the fact that the official story that Lee Harvey Oswald managed to get so many shots off in quick succession from the window of the school depository building in Dallas, Texas. The conspiracies will run and run because people want to believe that there was more involved in it than there was.
Yeah. And of course, what really compounded it was the assassin himself was then shot. So, I mean, that is the perfect conspiracy in that respect.
It does fit all those things, and of course he had a very interesting past. He'd spent time in Moscow. He defected to the Soviet Union. He was someone who had links to the mob. Kennedy had angered the mob. The mob had been supportive of him getting elected, and then his brother Bobby went after the mob, and they felt betrayed. Yep. So there was conspiracy that the mob would go after him. There were suggestions that Cuba were after him, and of course Lee Harvey Oswald's links to Russia suggested that the Soviet Union might be involved. So there's all sorts of possible other explanations without any evidence that people have clung on to for many years. And including that is RFK Jr., who is now part of the Trump administration.
Yeah, of course. So there's not a file anywhere that says this is what happened, that's been, locked up with sealing wax in a vault 700 feet below, I don't know, the Pentagon or something, where someone has the absolute script.
Yeah, and that presupposes that there's more to learn than the official story.
True.
And all the evidence suggests that there is nothing else to learn other than the official story. And in a sense, you can keep looking, but if the file doesn't exist because that's not what happened, then you're not going to find it. And Trump is in a sense, saying, OK, I'm giving you everything there is, but there is no secret file under the Pentagon.
Our previous caller, and I'm sad you missed him, David, but he said he'd watched this Zabruda video or film, 25,000 times. He said he's got it sorted out. It's the fella sitting in the front of the car. What did it? Now, you will be familiar with that theory. It's been said many times. I have to say, and maybe there's some confirmation bias going on, is the more you look at it, you can see why somebody might say that. Has that ever been fully debunked in any way?
Well, there's no evidence to support it. I mean, the most likely story, the documentary came out a few years ago saying that actually it may be a round loosed off by one of the security service people in the car behind. There's famous stories of the Secret Service when they go to a different town. It's rings off, wheels up, and they partied hard, and they were so drunk that actually when one of the stories is that once they heard a shot being fired from Lee Harvey Oswald, that they jumped and they hit the trigger, and that round hit the ground and then went up and took the back of Kennedy's head off.
Yeah.
But again, it's speculation based on the expectations of why there were no Secret Servicemen standing up behind him. Well, they weren't there because they were told to stand down because they came into work drunk the next morning. So there's all sorts of speculation that surrounds this, but there's no hard evidence anywhere. And you would think that actually, as people ended the end of their lives, they would have come forward. I mean, there was a book published last year which talked about the missing bullet, and one of the Secret Service guys talked about how he picked a bullet up off the back seat of the car and put it on the stretcher, and that had long been a source of controversy. And of course, in the film that Oliver Stone did called JFK, they talked about this mysterious bullet. Well, now we know that explanation, and it's a perfectly innocent explanation, but the guy hadn't mentioned it until he was in his 90th year. So there's lots of evidence to support the official theory, and none, unfortunately, to give us a more salacious, sensational version of the events that happened in Dallas.
And of course, there's all sorts of mischief said about Lyndon Johnson, of course, who eventually took over, and that he was somehow involved, and this was, he knew this was going to happen, and he was ready and waiting. But again, there's, as far as I can see, there's no evidence for that either.
Yeah, lots of speculation, but no evidence. Lots of people come up with all sorts of interesting theories, and there's a whole industry. I've been to Dallas. I've stood on the grassy knoll, and I've actually talked to all the people selling their stories and selling their pamphlets and books around there. And there's an industry going on there, and it suits certain people to have that industry continue, because it's always nice to have a mystery, isn't it?
Absolutely. Have you ever, just a final point there, David, have you ever come across one of these theories? I mean, you did allude to one a moment ago. Have you ever come across one and thought, oh, hang on a second, that could be the answer?
Well, I think the Secret Service one, the sort of cock-up theory rather than the conspiracy, is more likely. But of course, there would be a conspiracy of silence if that was true.
Yeah.
But again, where's the evidence for it?
Yeah. And just very finally, Mr. Trump has said it's not just the files on JFK. There are 2 others that are going to be released. Are we likely to see anything, as far as you heard, from those files? Is there light that needs to be shone?
Well, there's even less speculation as to why those other 2 individuals were killed. It was very clear: a racist attack on Martin Luther King and a political attack on Robert Kennedy Jr. Of course, his son thinks that there's more to see, but again, where's the evidence? They're not going to find it in the government files. If there had been anything salacious or interesting in those files, we'd have learnt about it before now. What you're seeing now is a release of documents just to tick a box and to fulfill a promise, rather than to tell us anything we didn't know already.
Indeed. We'll watch with interest, but not hold our breath. David, great to have you with us. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Professor David Dunn, Professor of International Politics, University of Birmingham, with us on the programme with reference to the JFK files, along with Martin Luther King as well, are going to be released. As Trump said, oh, it's a big one. This is a big one. And we waited decades for this. But nothing likely to be in the files.